All right, good evening. Welcome to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for the date of May 19th, 2022. This time I would like to call the meeting to order. The commissioners who are present for this evening are at City Hall. We also have staff from the city attorney, clerk's offices, as well as the city planning department. For anyone online, if you would like to simply watch the meeting, we would encourage you to stream this on the city's YouTube channel, and you can access that at meridiancity.org/live. With that, let's begin with the roll call. Mr. Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Grace? Here. Commissioner Lorcher?
Here.
Commissioner Yearsley?
Here.
Commissioner Grove?
Here.
Commissioner Seal?
Here. Okay, the first item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. Could I get a motion to adopt the agenda?
Moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adopt the agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, and we have two items on the consent agenda. One is to approve the minutes of the April 28th, 2022 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Second is to approve the minutes of the May 5th, 2022 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Could I get a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded to accept the consent agenda. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, so at this time, I would like to explain the public hearing process. We will open each item individually, begin with the staff report. Staff will report their findings on how they adhere to the comprehensive plan and the Unified Development Code. After staff has made their presentation, the applicant will come forward to present their case and respond to staff comments. They will have 15 minutes to do so. After the applicant is finished, we will open the floor to public testimony. Each person will be called on only once during the public testimony. The clerk will call the names individually of those who have signed up on our website in advance to testify. You will then be unmuted in Zoom, or you can come to the microphones and chambers. Please state your name and address for the record, and you will have 3 minutes to address the commission. If you have previously sent pictures or a presentation for the meeting, it will be displayed on the screen, and the clerk will run the presentation. If you have established that you are speaking on behalf of a larger group like an HOA, where others from that group will allow you to speak on their behalf, you will have up to 10 minutes. After all of those who have signed up in advance have spoken, we will invite any others that may wish to testify. If you wish to speak on the topic, you may come forward in chambers. If you are speaking from Zoom, please, and you have multiple devices, please make sure to mute the secondary devices so we don't get feedback and we can hear you clearly. When you're finished, if the commission does not have any questions for you, you will return to your seat in chambers or be muted on Zoom, and you will no longer have the ability to speak. And please remember, we will not call on you a second time. After all testimony has been heard, the applicant will be given another 10 minutes to come back and respond. When the applicant has finished responding to questions and concerns, we will close the public hearing. The commissioners will have the opportunity to discuss and hopefully be able to find or make final decisions or recommendations to City Council as needed. So at this time, I'd like to continue file number H2022-0012 for Amina's Daycare, which was continued from May 5th. And we will begin with the staff report.
Greetings, Mr. Chair, members of the commissions. Alan Tiefenbach, Associate Planner at the City of Meridian. Yes, this has been continued a few times due to some issues with posting. This time it has been posted and mailed properly. This is a request for a conditional use permit. Property is 0.14 acres, zoned R8, located on the west side of South Locust Grove, which is north of Amity. This is a conditional use permit to allow a group daycare. The property is already permitted to allow what is known as the family daycare. That allows up to 6 kids. In order to go, and that could be allowed administratively, but in order to go from 6 to 12 kids, they're required to go through a public meeting, which is the purpose of this evening. Again, located at 4175 South Leaning Tower. There's already an in-home daycare there that has been there with 6 children. Applicant wants to expand up to 12. According to the applicant, the daycare will operate from 6:30 to 7 p.m. on weekdays. Playtime is limited to 1 hour after 9 a.m. and 1 hour after 1 p.m. Applicant has stated that they presently provide and will continue to provide the transportation for the children. Although in the instance that there may be people picking up or drop off, the house does have a parking pad, which is approximately 30 feet wide. So that would accommodate an additional car, as well as there is parking spaces that are available along the curb in front of the house if needed. Staff has received quite a few letters initially from adjacent property owners. I think the last one we received was maybe in March. Original issues, we're talking about parking, traffic, and safety issues. There's some pictures I took here. Staff visit, based on the issues that were expressed about the parking and the traffic, staff went out in the middle of a day and looked. And at that time, all we saw on that whole street was just 2 cars parked in front of the house. There was one particular citizen that sent staff emails that there had been some ongoing issues with code enforcement. There had been some complaints called into PD. Staff contacted the police department that said there had been one call, and I guess there might have been somewhat confrontational, but they did talk to the applicant and it might have been a miscommunication. Since that time, the PD said they've gone out there 3 more times just to check, and they have not seen any other issues with that. With that, I don't have any other additional recommendations or requirements. Staff recommends approval.
All right, thank you very much. Would the applicant like to come forward?
Mr. Chair, he is online and unmuted.
Okay.
Greetings. Thank you guys for hearing us. My name is Nick O'Brant. I'm an attorney and I represent Ms. Godly Moulon.
You could give your address for the record, please.
Absolutely. It's 4106 South Sartiano, Meridian, Idaho, 83642. I'm about 5 houses down from this. We thank the city and the staff for helping us get through this and through the process, and appreciate the work and recommendation. I know my clients here are excited to get this hopefully and seek approval. Ultimately, I think there's no real concerns to address. There were several neighbors that I guess had a change of heart, and I think I would like to thank them for that. Other than that, we don't have much more to add. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for the applicant or staff? All right, none at this time. Do we have anybody that's signed up to testify on this?
Mr. Chair, only the applicant's representative signed up. That's all.
Okay. Looks like we have one other person on Zoom at this point. If they'd like to testify, they can raise their hand.
And I believe they're with an applicant later in the application.
Okay, if there's no questions, and does the applicant have anything further to add, or?
Nothing further. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I just have a general question because we've seen these a number of times. And there's a comment in the findings that these are much needed services. I'm just wondering if staff can expand on that. Is there a real need for daycare services that it would prompt that?
You probably
And maybe you
the
don't know
wrong
the
person
answer.
because I don't have any children.
Yeah.
I can tell you that I regularly hear about the costs of daycare, especially in more of an institutional or commercial setting. In-home daycare that's run by people from home providers tends to be much cheaper, tends to serve the surrounding neighborhoods. I might defer to somebody that actually has kids about the need of daycare.
Yeah, and I apologize. That might not be a fair question to you. We've seen these a number of times, and I'm just curious to know. Seems like a lot of residents are going from 6 to 12 children, and I was just curious to know what the demand is for this. And I know Meridian's growing, of course, a lot of children. It would make sense, but I was just looking for some more information. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
Commissioner Grace, I could partially answer your question just based on some of my professional workings in this regard. Currently, throughout the state, and more particularly in Meridian, we have a a significant lack of childcare facilities and childcare options outside of the house. With COVID, over the last couple of years, the demand has fluctuated somewhat, but the wait list on most childcare facilities is extensive, and the cost is more than a mortgage for a newborn in many cases. So the need is there for childcare to be provided in a multitude of ways, both with these in-home facilities and with the larger facilities as well. We are severely underrepresented with childcare facilities.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. That's good to know. This is a great option for people, so I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Lorsher, go ahead.
in regard to staff, for the summary of the requests, the playtime is limited to 1 hour between 9 a.m. and 1 hour after 1 p.m. Is that a guideline or is that a steadfast rule?
Let me double check and see if that was in our conditions of approval. If you think it needs to be and it's not, you can certainly add that.
Would be the opposite. Children need to be outside. So 1 hour a day, and if they're there from, what are their hours? 7 a.m. to say 6 p.m. if somebody's working, and only to allow the children out for 2 hours a day, especially in the summertime, seems not the best use of the children's time.
I was quite a hyperactive child, and I'm sure that would have been a nightmare for my parents. I'll double check and see if that was a condition of approval. Give me just a minute.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Somebody has to ask a question while Alan's looking.
I apologize, Mr. Chair. The applicant does have their hand up. I don't know if they wanted to answer that or if you're still taking. Mr. O'Brien, you can go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out a couple of things. I live in this neighborhood too. We did just have a baby in November. I quit my job at a firm and took a few clients and worked from home myself, primarily because of the cost of daycare. It is a huge concern around here. The growth is incredible, and there's no shortage of folks that can't get daycare. So we appreciate that. And then on a sort of practical side, I don't think anybody in this neighborhood knew these folks ran a daycare until these notices went out. So that should probably say something. I would have some other thoughts to say in a different setting, but I don't see any problem here. And there's a park right in front of my house. Every day during the summer, there's 20, 30, 40 kids out there, if not more. And it's wonderful. That's all I think I have to say on that.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Alan.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, Alan Tiefenbach, just to clarify, that's not a condition of approval. That was just a statement in the staff report with what the applicant said. So there's no requirement on what time they can or can't be out.
So they can have the children out for more than 2 hours a day?
There's no requirement as a condition of approval.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? I get a motion to close the public testimony?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to close the public testimony for file number H 2022-0012. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. If anybody would like to ask any or debate anything else or give a motion on this, looks fairly straightforward.
Mr. Chairman, for a motion,
Commissioner Grace, go ahead.
I would move that after considering all staff, applicant, and public testimony, to recommend approval of the city council to the city council file number H 2022-0012 as presented in the staff report for the hearing date of May 19th, 2022 with no modifications.
Okay.
And point of clarification, this is a CUP, so it would not be to city council.
It
Is
would
that
be to approve, not to recommend approval.
Correct.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would alter my motion to the extent that I would motion to approve, not to recommend to approve.
Okay. Still have the second?
Second.
Okay. It has been moved and seconded to approve item number H 2022-0012 for Amina's Daycare with no modifications. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you very much. All right, this time I'd like to open public hearing H 2022-0019 for Black Rock Coffee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, Alan Tiefenbach. This is a request for another conditional use permit. The property is about a little less than an acre. It's Zone CC. It's located at the southeast corner of South Eagle Road and East Victory, which is in the Shops at Victory Center. Property was annexed in 2008. There were numerous extensions to the preliminary plat until they got the final plat done. Final plat was done in 2016. When the property was annexed, one of the conditions, when the property was annexed, alternative compliance was granted. The property is directly next to existing residential. There's a requirement that if you build a commercial use next to residential, that you have to supply a 25-foot wide landscape buffer. The alternative compliance was to allow this landscape buffer to be reduced to as little as 10 feet. And a condition of approval with that was that they had to put in a verticrete wall, which is basically a large concrete sound wall. I only say that because I'll probably come back to that. That's ship has already sailed. Alternative compliance was already granted, but they don't meet the buffer, but they do have the wall that was required. So this is a request for a conditional use permit to allow a drive-through establishment. It's within 300 feet of an existing residence, and it's within 300 feet of another drive-through facility. And that's what the requirements are. If one of those two are met or both, you have to go through a conditional use. Again, property was annexed in 2008. It's one of 3 commercial lots. A conditional use was approved for the lot on the north. That would be the Rite Aid. And that was approved to allow a drive-through facility on that Rite Aid within 300 feet of the residential properties, which are to the east. This would be another drive-through establishment within 300 feet of that and 300 feet of the existing residential. It's a 1,975 square feet Black Rock coffee shop. This drive-through establishment, again, is within 300 feet of both. If you look at the site plan here, a site plan shows stacking lanes. That's what you would see here. So this is the stacking lane. Though, as you probably know, some of these drive-through coffee shops sometimes have a tendency to have traffic parking, backing out into the street. In this particular case, we're a little less concerned about that because all of this is a parking lot. So if we did have one of those days where there was a lot of people parked waiting to get their coffee, it would spill into the parking lot versus into the street. There's also an escape lane. This is required anytime a stacking lane is longer than 100 feet. The way that this works is somebody comes in, they change their mind, or somebody calls them, they realize they forget something, they can jump into this escape lane here and get out with having to wait all through the line. There is also a requirement in the specific use standards that the window of the drive-through facility has to be visible from the street. That's for a safety issue. You don't want to have a window on the other side of the building and have no idea what's going on when there's being cash handled. The window in that case would be to the north. So you would be able to see that when you're coming down Eagle Road South or from the parking lot at the Rite Aid. There's an outdoor speaker that is shown, and it's about 200 feet from the existing residence. It's not labeled on here, but if you can see where my pointer is, this is where that speaker and that menu board would be. We did have some concerns about that being close to the residential. Because of that, we asked the applicant if they would submit to us a decibel study that would sort of demonstrate what kind of sound impacts would be from that speaker board. The applicant did do that decibel study, and what it showed is that at 16 feet from the speaker, it's about 36 decibels. To put that into context, 40 is considered a whisper. So at 16 feet, it's about a whisper. The actual adjacent property is 200 feet from that speaker. The property owner of the property to the east, directly next door, the house that's closest, submitted a letter to staff, and this letter was in support of this development. Basically, the property owner said that this developer has done a very good job working with them and has done everything that they've asked for them to do, and that he is confident that this would be fine and he has no issues with it, and urges support. Only other comment would be these elevations. Overall, they're pretty good. They're franchise type architecture. We do have some requirements in our architectural standards manual that there has to be at least 2 field materials. This may qualify, but the problem is that, and I don't want to get in all to get into the weeds here, but one of those field materials can't be metal. In this case, it looks like it is. So that's something that staff will work out with the applicant, but overall, the architecture is good with this. Again, we've received 1 letter of support. So the proposal meets all the dimensional standards. It meets the specific use requirements for a drive-through facility. Staff recommends approval with conditions, and those conditions included complying with the development agreement on the hours of operation being between 6 and 10. Specifically at the applicant's request, we put it in the conditional use that the hours of operation would comply with the hours of the DA unless they were modified. And the reason why is the applicant may in the future want to modify those hours through a DA mod, and they don't want to have to also come in and modify the conditional use. We also believe that it complies with for the most part, the architectural standards manual for the elevations with probably some tweaks. And the only other thing we commented about in our conditions is that there is a walkway that you can see here. It's striped on there. The way that our code reads, it said it has to be brick pavers or some kind of material. It just can't be striped. With that, I'll stand for any questions, and the staff is done with their presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. Would the applicant?
Mr. Chairman, may I add a supplemental comment real quick?
Absolutely.
I just want to just really for the record primarily and for the applicant, but in the proposed conditions that are before the commission tonight is proposed condition A15, which references the development agreement that Alan just described. And one provision in that so the condition essentially says this project that you're considering tonight will be or shall be subject to those approvals that happened previously, including the development agreement. There's a provision in that development agreement that says that the owner developer is responsible for reimbursing the city for previous expenses to extend sewer and water to this site. We're still doing some research as to whether that has occurred yet or not. And so we're not quite prepared to make a definitive statement, but I just wanted to put some on the record that indicates that provision in the DA is applicable. And if that payment has not, or reimbursement has not yet occurred, that would be a prerequisite before construction could begin on this project. I just wanted an opportunity to put that on the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, would the applicant like to come forward?
Chairman, members of the commission, my name is Jeff Huber. My address is 8385 West Emerald Street in Boise, and I represent the applicant. We want to thank staff for their report tonight. It was very thorough, and we thank them for recommending approval. And we're in agreement with all of the conditions as stated in the report. One of the neighbors has come a long ways here tonight. I don't know if they want to testify, but they were late and are not on your sign-up sheet. So you might want to ask if someone else would like to address this.
Okay, absolutely. They'll have,
I stand
the
for
opportunity.
questions.
Is there any questions for applicant or staff? Commissioner Usually?
Mr. Chair, just want to clarify. I know most coffee shops like to start before 6, but you're okay with starting at 6 o'clock then?
Well, we actually are planning to come back and modify the development agreement to so that they start at 5.
That's why I was just curious. Thank you.
Anybody else have questions? All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Do you have anybody?
We do, Mr. Chair. Mr. Aldridge did sign in.
Good evening, sir. If you could give us your name and address for the record.
Bob Aldridge, I'm 3300 East Falcon Drive. And I look at either they're in my backyard or I'm in their backyard. We've been there since 1985 when life was much more simple. We've worked with this group now over quite a number of years, working on initially just general development, then through the Rite Aid. And they have literally bent over backwards to accommodate us. And I am thoroughly confident that if any questions come up, it will be settled. We had some lighting issues from when it was first put up, and they went way out of the way to get those all solved. I don't have any problems with noise. As noted, the coffee speakers are pretty low intensity. There's a tall wall in between us. I've got two giant trees there with walnuts that for some reason ravens take over and drop on people's head in the Rite Aid. And also the way this is laid out, the traffic is never going to show any lights into our property. Plus, we're pretty isolated and we have more trees on our property. So I think it's a good project. It's a good usage. It's a lot lower impact. A lot of things could be there. So very much in favor of it.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have anything for? No? All right, thank you, sir. Appreciate the testimony. Anybody else that wants to testify, you can raise your hand. If not, does the applicant have anything they would like to add further? Indicating no? All right, can I get a motion to close the public hearing for item number H 2022-0019?
Moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to close the public hearing for item number H 2022-0019. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Anybody would like to add more to the discussion or
Mr. Chair.
throw a motion out? Go right ahead.
Pretty simple when the applicant agrees with the staff report and the public testimony with the neighbor most impacted is very supportive. So I think we should be able to move forward. So with that, after considering all staff, applicant, and public testimony, I move to approve file number H 2022-0019 as presented in the staff report for the hearing date of May 19th, 2022, with no modifications.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve item number H 2022-0019 Black Rock Coffee with no modifications. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, next, we'll open file number H 2022-0026 for Peak at Sawtooth Village. We'll begin with staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. The next application before you is a request for a conditional use permit. This site consists of 0.93 of an acre of land. It's zone CN, located at the southeast corner of North Linder Road and West McMillan Road at 4752 North Linder Road. This property was annexed in 2013 with the requirement of a development agreement, and a preliminary plat was approved. A final plat was later approved in 2015 for McLinder subdivision. The comprehensive plan future land use map designation is mixed use neighborhood. A conditional use is proposed for a drive-through establishment within 300 feet of another drive-through facility, which is directly to the south, and a residential district and existing residences, which are kitty-cornered to this site to the southeast in the CN zoning district. A 4,846 square foot building is proposed to be constructed on the site with 3 tenant spaces. A drive-through is proposed on the westerly 2,200 square foot tenant space for a restaurant. The tenant intends for the drive-through to be more of a pickup location where customers would order ahead through a mobile app rather than ordering from a speaker or window. No speaker or menu board is proposed at this time. And there are specific use standards in the UDC that pertain to drive-through establishments as follows. Stacking lanes are required to have sufficient capacity to prevent obstruction of driveways, drive aisles, and the public right-of-way by patrons. The stacking lane proposed for the site will accommodate approximately 5 vehicles, which the applicant believes will be sufficient for their use and business model. Staff is concerned if the stacking lane backs up, the drive aisle on the north side of the building may obstruct vehicles trying to enter or exit the parking spaces in that area. Also, while the proposed stacking lane may accommodate the proposed user, it may not be able to accommodate future users that may be more intense without obstructing the drive aisle and parking on the north side of the building. Second, the stacking lane is required to be a separate lane from the circulation lanes needed for access and parking, except that stacking lanes may provide access to designated employee parking. The stacking lane for the site is a separate lane from the circulation lanes needed for access and parking on the west side of the building. However, if stacking backs up around the north side of the building, it could obstruct parking in that area. There are also a few other standards the site is in compliance with. Based on staff's analysis, the proposed drive-through is deemed to be in general compliance with the specific use standards as required. If the commission does not feel there is adequate stacking area to accommodate vehicles in the drive-through without obstructing the drive aisle needed for circulation and parking on the north side of the building, revisions may be required to the site design. The proposed access and parking complies with UDC standards. Conceptual building elevations were submitted as shown that incorporate a mix of materials consisting of horizontal hardboard siding, stone veneer, and glazing. The final design shall be consistent with the design standards listed in the Architectural Standards Manual. Written testimony was received from the applicant. They are in agreement with the staff report conditions of approval. Staff is recommending approval. Staff will stand for any questions.
Okay, thank you. The applicant like to come forward? Good evening. Your name and address for the record, please.
Yes, Tom Bevan, address 4202 North Boise, 8370.
Can you pull that microphone towards you? Either one, just.
Take any questions. I don't really have anything to add to the staff report. Glad to take questions.
Anybody have any questions for the applicant?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Grace, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, sir, so it indicated that it was not intended, well, let me get this right. It was intended that people would use an app to place their orders, and then are they only going up to the window then to just pick up the order?
Yes, it's like a pickup location where there's no menu board and there's no speaker. You have the, by app you order, and then you go and pick it up when they just hand it out to you and move on.
How will they know it's ready, I guess?
They do it through their smartphone.
They get notified
Yes.
over the smartphone that it's ready?
It's ready, yeah. And they get a number and they come by and pick it up.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Yearsley, do you have something?
I just wanted, if you could address, you know, I'm not quite sure what business this is or if it's an established business. If the use does change, how do we ensure that we have enough stacking or not having issues in the future with only having 5 parking spaces? Is there, you know, other conditions or things that we can consider to provide for more stacking if necessary in the future? Based on staff's comments that they just presented.
I guess we could address that. The tenant is signed a 10-year lease, so it's, but in the future after that, I don't know, I guess we'd have to look at it again.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Orchard, go ahead.
in regard to Commissioner Yearsley's comment, so after that tenant leaves, would the next business have to get a conditional use permit to address the stacking lane that
No.
you're addressing?
No, they wouldn't have to.
I guess I'll kind of pile on here a little bit. So while this is an operation, if they wanted to change the business model, let's say, like this isn't working purely online, what would they need to go through? And Sonia, this is kind of a question for you, probably more or less. If they did want to put out a menu and a microphone and all that, is there a process they need to go through, or they basically are conditioned to use it as they see fit in that regard?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, as is, there is no condition prohibiting a menu and speaker. You could certainly include that. That would apply to this user as well as future users of the drive-through.
Okay. I think the reasoning behind this is, I think the use that you're proposing, at least in my mind, if people are coming, and there are a lot of services that work like this now, so that's how I get my haircuts anymore. So they let me know when to come and I go and they cut my hair and I leave. So it's pretty nice to do that. So I understand a little bit of the business model that's going on here. That said, if it does change, and I ride to dinner and go to this facility here quite a bit, I can see where if that model changed and people were waiting, if it wraps around, it's going to make it really hard for people to not block that, the private drive that's in there, or private drive, I guess I should say. As far as traffic goes. And I mean, the other part of it is if you get somebody that's waiting at the window, somebody that's trying to use the escape lane, because there are other businesses in this. I mean, it's not just the one business in the building. There are several businesses. So if you have somebody parking in the diagonal parking to the west side of the building, you have somebody that's in the escape lane, you have somebody that's ordering or picking up, I should say. That's, I drive a full-size truck. So if you got 3 of those trying to do those maneuvers in there, I just don't know that it's going to fit. So.
Well, I could say that I talked to the tenant about that actually, what they do in other locations, and they do this same thing in almost all their locations, and they haven't changed it. They say it works very well. So I wouldn't think that this tenant would change it because it works so well for them in other locations. It's a national chain, Bubba Goose. But well, I guess it's more of a regional chain. But so they like the process and it works well. And I asked him, do you want us to put something in there for a speaker later? And he said, no, I don't want any speaker wires, or I don't want any pre-planned menu board wires or lighting or anything like that. They just don't use them.
Mr. Chair, would you be amenable if we added the condition to, that to not allow a menu board or a speaker without prior approval in the condition?
Yeah, we could go with that.
Is there any other questions? No? All right. You want to have a quick seat? We'll see if
Thank you.
anybody is going to testify online, or I don't think we have anybody in the audience. No? Okay. Sorry, sir. No, I'll assume there's nothing further to add at this point. So if somebody would like to give me a motion to close the public hearing,
Mr. Chair,
go right ahead.
I move to close the public hearing for Peak at Sawtooth Village, file number H 2022-0026.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to close the public hearing for file number H 2022-0026, Peak of Sawtooth Village. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Who would like to go first?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Yearsley, go ahead.
I agree with the concerns of staff, and I understand, and I think if this works, I think it's a great idea. But I would be amenable to, or I would like to see that condition to not allow a menu board or a speaker without prior additional conditional use permit or conditional approval.
Okay, I agree with that as well.
Mr.
Grace?
Chairman, I think that's a great recommendation. I agree with that. I probably still have concerns that there might be stacking. And based on the depiction, what that would mean for, people parking but I'm willing to allow for what the applicant said about, it's been done before and it's not a problem. I do worry about potential further future, I should say, tenants there. So I agree with Commissioner Yearsley. I think that's a great recommendation.
Mr. Chair.
Go right ahead.
I think maybe just to have it on the record for some of the thinking here, though, is if it does ever come back for an additional CUP to add the speaker board, I think having the applicant at that point in time look at relocating the placement of the pickup window would be an appropriate thing to at least strongly consider, and moving it to the south side versus the west side. If a speaker board does come in, because it would improve the stacking capacity. I will say one thing that works in the favor of this is it's overparked a little bit. So that does give some additional leeway in terms of how they could operate with running orders out and things like that. So I'm not as concerned if there was not that additional over parking.
Anyone else?
Mr. Chair,
Go right ahead.
after considering all staff, applicant and public testimony, I move to approve file number H 2022-0026 as presented in the staff report for the hearing date of May 19th, 2022, with the following modifications: that no menu board or speaker may be allowed without prior approval from the city.
A second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve item number H 2022-0026 for Peak at Sawtooth Village with the aforementioned modifications. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Mr. Chair, just a clarification for Sonia and myself.
Right.
On that. I think it was your intent to say, come back and get CUP approval. If
That's
I'm
correct.
understanding correctly. All right, thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, and thank you very much for that. So none were opposed, so motion carries. All right, thank you very much. All right, at this time, we will open up file number H 2022-0015, which is Bountiful Commons East, and we will begin with staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. The next application before you is a request for a combined preliminary and final plat. There is also a concurrent development agreement modification application that will be heard by the city council that does not require the commission action tonight. This site consists of 2.2 acres of land. It's on CC and it's located at 5960 North Linder Road. This property was annexed in 2017 with the requirement of a development agreement. A preliminary and final plat was approved in 2018. A property boundary adjustment was recently approved this year, which established the current configuration of the property. The comprehensive plan future land use map designation is mixed use community. As I mentioned earlier, the modification to the existing development agreement is proposed to update the conceptual development plan and remove the conceptual building elevations for Chili's from the agreement and replace them with concept elevations for the proposed single-story commercial and office buildings. Changes to the concept plan consist of replacing the 7,000 and 10,000 square foot buildings with a shared outdoor plaza area in between the two buildings, as shown on the site plan there on the left, with 4 multi-tenant commercial and office buildings with individual outdoor plazas at the rear of each building. And that site plan is shown there on the left as well. Staff is recommending changes to the concept plan that consist of removal of the parking spaces on the west side of the site that back out into the backage road and removal of the parking in between each set of buildings for the provision of common usable area and plaza area as required in the development agreement and the comprehensive plan for mixed use designated areas. These changes should be made prior to the city council hearing per the staff report. Again, this application is not before you for a recommendation tonight. This is purely informational. A combined preliminary and final plat is proposed as shown to re-subdivide a portion of lot 1 and all of lot 4, block 1, Bountiful Commons subdivision. The proposed plat consists of 3 buildable lots on 2.2 acres of land. The preliminary plat is shown on the left and the proposed final plat is shown on the right. The proposed plat consists of 3 buildable lots on 2.2 acres of land. Access to the subdivision exists via a private driveway and backage road that runs along the west boundary of the site parallel to North Linder Road. This is a copy of the proposed landscape plan for the site. There are no public streets that abut this property. Written testimony has been received from Stephanie Hopkins, KM Engineering, the applicant. They are not in favor of amending the concept plan as recommended by staff. Staff is recommending approval of the combined preliminary and final plat with the conditions in the staff report. Staff will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Sonia. The applicant like to come forward? Good evening. Just need your name and address for the record.
Chair, members of the commission, Stephanie Hopkins with KM Engineering. Our address is 5725 North Discovery Way in Boise 83713. I have a presentation. I don't know if Sonia has it looked in quite yet. I also have a flash drive if that's easier.
Sorry about that, Steph.
No, no problem.
Just a second here. All right, sorry about that, Stephanie. Get it opened here.
Beautiful weather we're having lately.
I'm kidding. Pretty chilly today
It was a little chilly.
compared to the last couple days.
It'll blow all the pollen
I
elsewhere.
know.
Give me a second.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so Sonia did a great job summarizing our request. I won't go over too many of the details she already covered, but this property is south of Linder Village. It's just east of Linder Road and south of Chinden Boulevard. It's originally part of the Bountiful Commons subdivision. This is, I think, lots 1 and 4 within that original subdivision. We're going to be calling it Bountiful Commons East. We recently did a property boundary adjustment. It used to be the backwards L, it used to be a little corner there as well that was part of lot 1. It's now been taken out of the property. And so we're proposing to subdivide the remainder into 3 commercial lots, as Sonia mentioned. We are requesting a couple of changes to staff's recommendation on the development agreement modification. We're proposing to update the development agreement with the new concept plan that we are proposing. This is the original concept plan, shows a 7,000 square foot building and 10,000 square foot building with central open space or a common open space in the center there with surface parking lots. And this is our proposed concept plan. So the northwest portion of the site is the lot that was taken out with the property boundary adjustment. So the remainder will be the 3 lots that'll be in the combined preliminary and final plat. And so the concept plan that we're showing now does not have a central open space, but it has 4 open plazas for each of the multi-tenant buildings that we're proposing. They'll be connected with sidewalk throughout the site and will connect ultimately to the drive aisle that's to the east or to the west. This is conceptual elevations that we're proposing for the buildings. They're multi-tenant buildings, don't have users in place quite yet, but the intent really behind updating the development agreement is to have a little bit of flexibility with the concept plan and the elevations that we're proposing so that we can be flexible for future tenants and make sure that if there's someone that comes in that maybe wants to do a property boundary adjustment to get rid of a lot line or modify the existing concept plan. So say somebody wants to come in and actually build a building across lot 7 and lot 8, they could come in and do an administrative lot or property boundary adjustment to get rid of that lot line and build a building. So we'd really like to have some flexibility with the concept plan that's attached to the development agreement, as well as the elevations that are included in our request. So this is the combined preliminary and final plat. 3 commercial lots taking access from the private drive aisle that goes north-south was recently constructed. And we are going to be installing a 25-foot landscape buffer adjacent to the existing residential homes on the eastern part of the site. That'll happen with site development of those 2 lots. So as Sonia mentioned, we are requesting to modify a couple of her conditions, or a couple of conditions that are attached to her recommendation. And that is to remove 10 parking spaces that are on the west boundary of the site adjacent to the private north-south drive aisle. As you can see on our concept plan, we're currently showing 10 parking spaces that come right off of that drive aisle to serve the buildings that are on the west side there. And to replace parking areas between buildings A and B and C and D with plazas or the public, quasi-public open space. So that is so that we can have more flexibility and parking for future tenants. As you're all aware, restaurants and some uses require a lot more parking than other uses. And because we don't have users in place for the 3 lots that we're proposing, it would be nice to be able to have some flexibility for future tenants to make sure that we're providing adequate parking for folks, as well as remaining flexible for anyone that might want to come in and modify the site. The requirement for the mixed use community land use, which is the designation that we're in, does require, I think it's 5% public, quasi-public open space. And this property was initially part of a 5-acre piece that was within, for the development agreement. This is a little over 2 acres. It's a smaller site and it's difficult to locate open space in a central location. So it just would really be preferred to have them individually located on each lot to make sure that not only for installation, but to make sure that it's easily maintained by those buildings rather than the entire office complex. It would also be difficult to make sure that a central open space was installed at one time if it was in the center of these 4 lots. So that's the reasoning behind that request. These are the plaza areas that we're proposing. Additionally, there's a pretty large chunk of open space that's going to be provided with the Linder Village subdivision or the Linder Village development to the north. It's going to be a public park that has parking and micropaths that kind of go through it. So just did this as a schematic to show you how that might work. People from the office complex or whatever uses decide to locate here could easily walk up to that open space and hang out there. I think it would probably, this area is going to be a little bit more of a draw for folks, residents and employees in the area than the complex that we're talking about would be. These are just some photos of the drive aisle to show kind of how it's currently configured and how that might function. So the Beehive Federal Credit Union is constructed and it's to our west. And then our property is the undeveloped property on your left. As you can see, it's not very busy right now. There's not any vehicles coming or going, and there's no one parked on the side of the road. This is an example of how I think that parking off of that drive aisle would function. This is a complex on the right-hand side of your screen that's over off of Eagle Road. It's just north of Chinden Boulevard, where there's a rail theater and some other stuff over there. They have kind of a similar configuration where they've got Eagle Road's actually a state highway, so it's probably a little more heavily trafficked than Linder Road is, but folks can come in off of the arterial roadway and go onto a local collector and then come onto a drive aisle where they have diagonal parking in place. And I've been in this complex several times and it seems to work pretty well. It actually tends to slow traffic down. So folks know that it's meant to be a place to stop. It's a destination. It's not a thoroughfare. So with that, we think that the addition of these commercial uses will be a benefit to the city. We're excited for this project and really looking forward to continue working with the city on it. I'd like to hear your opinions, I guess, on the development agreement modification request, as I know you won't be making a recommendation to city council, but we're interested to kind of know, what maybe your opinions are. With that, I will stand for any questions. The developer is here tonight too, if you have any that I can't answer.
Thank you
Thank
very much. Questions for applicant or staff?
Mr. Chair.
Go right ahead.
So Stephanie, with this change, it sounds like the intent is to have it be more office and not have any restaurant retail operations? Is that the intent, or?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Grove, I will probably defer to our client on that. I don't know, they don't have any users in place that I'm familiar with. The northwest parcel that we separated off with the property boundary adjustment is going to be a dentist. So that is an office, kind of a professional office use. There will probably be a fair amount of parking needed for that kind of use, as I'm sure they'll have several chairs and several appointments at a time. But the other lots, I don't know that they have any specific kinds of uses in mind. And I think that they can come up and kind of.
The reason I'm asking is, I guess we don't have a say on how that plays out tonight, but just in terms of how we're conceptualizing the use and why we would, you know, be in favor or against not having a more centralized usable space amongst the four uses. I struggle with the general concept as provided because it doesn't tie into a larger mixed use of the area when it's very isolated. It's not isolated because it's fairly small, but you're asking for some feedback, and that'd be my feedback. Is I don't personally like how that is integrating currently. And I know we don't have a say, but just my 2 cents.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, thank you for your feedback. If I might ask a question.
Go right ahead.
Would it be preferred or maybe help the situation if there was a pathway leading from our site plan at some point to the open space that's to the north?
For me, it's the pathway would definitely help. It's the I think of good words, and it's later in the day for me, but it's not tied together. It's 4 separate entities and not one being looked at as one development. Essentially, I know it might get built out as 4 separate things, but it doesn't look like there's an integrated plan with how they would function together. But you know, they're 4 parts, and they're not 4 parts of a whole.
Thank you for the feedback.
Yeah, and I mean, the feedback I'll give is just on the drive aisle, really, where you know, we have a drive aisle that's coming down. It looks like the bulb outs and the trash receptacle is going to kind of impede that. I mean, if anything can be done, and I can see why Sonia put that in there as far as those 10 parking spots, the bulb outs and everything, that looks like it's going to push right into that drive aisle. The more you can keep that open, the better it's going to be for everybody, your neighbors, your customers, everybody involved. So, you know, and depending on who you market this for, you know, having open areas, especially in between the buildings, there's, if you've been down by the Capri Cafe, it's just south of this. They have an open plaza that's in there. It gets used a ton by the businesses that are in there. But, you know, of course you have essentially, you know, a dining establishment and a brewery basically sharing that space. And they do have a nice pathway that goes right into the residential area there. So that's very, very nice, to where if you have something like that and you have just a parking lot, kind of difficult to go the other way. So I don't know if there's a way to, you know, kind of mash this up a little bit, maybe come up with a better solution overall. I think that you know, the small amount of common area off the back is helpful. I mean, you can have some patio out there if you do have a restaurant or something along those lines. If you do have a dentist office, that's wasted space. So, I mean, if my dentist, I'd prefer to wait outside, but I don't have that option. But anyway, I mean, the feedback that I can give on it, that's what I'm seeing of it. So, you know, it would be nice to see that drive aisle opened up, the bulb outs taken away, that parking, you know, sacrifice, substituted. You are overparked, which is great. Thank you very much. It's not often that we're talking about taking parking spaces away. So high marks for that for sure. But that's you know, the way that I look at it, I mean, there's other stuff that's going on here that kind of plays into this where you have, you know, a larger space for a business opportunity. And just north of this, you have multi-story live work. So, you know, somebody that, you know, they're making their side hustle, they're, you know, working or living in the multi-story live work, and now they need to expand. Well, here's some place to do that. So, and they happen to have a nice library up the road. So I had to say that benefit of this guy here. So anyway, that's the feedback that I have on it. I mean, I think that a connection into the walking path to the common area in the north would be great. I mean, the more connected things are, the better. I think, I don't think it presents any kind of issues as far as, you know, anybody having nefarious behavior in there, trying to, you know, do something, get away or do anything like that. I think it just provides for better accessibility. Anybody else? Sorry, I rambled on long enough.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
This is Stephanie, and I'm just kind of going off of what Commissioner Seal said, and I have two questions, and I apologize if you already went over this and I missed it, but on that north side, what's the transition into that park area? I just wasn't catching that.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Grace, right now, I don't believe we're showing any walkway along the drive aisle. So the transition up to the north would be just for folks to walk along the drive aisle to the pathway that's existing.
Okay, but there's not a fence or anything. You can walk to it.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Grace, I don't believe there's a fence, and I don't know that our client has plans. No, they're shaking their heads that they don't have plans.
Okay. The second question, I think I know the answer to it, but just to confirm that the language in the application about the event center, that was the previous version of it, and that's no longer happening. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Grove, go ahead.
just real quick. So I won't belabor it too much, but just looking at, I'm not a fan of the parking on the drive aisle. I think that it has the potential of causing more problems than it solves. I think having a walking connection, a pedestrian connection would help this project in the future to be able to connect to the larger development to the north. You know, that's a large development going on up there, and anything that you could do to, you know, connect the two would, I would think, probably help you have that the feel of it just being an extension of what is available to the public up there. So again, we don't have anything to stipulate here, but just kind of some feedback.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Yearsley, go ahead.
So I guess I'm a little conflicted because looking at the building styles that you're looking, to me, it feels more like a strip mall type facility, but yet you're trying to market this more an office type setting, which I think understanding, you know, what's on the plan to what's actually being proposed, you know, because if it's more office style, I don't know if the you know, the open space is going to be utilized nearly as much versus strip mall style. So, and I guess that's where I struggle with at this point, trying to make a decision on how best to move forward with this. So,
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Yearsley, I was looking back at our client as you're talking, and I think that they are planning to pursue more of an office use for the buildings. That being said, they don't have users in place. Yeah, maybe. Thank you.
that would be awesome.
Yeah, just let us know who you're, I mean, you're spending money here, so there's got to be a marketing plan.
So Trevor Gosser, 74 East, 500 South, Suite 200, Bountiful, Utah, 84010. Appreciate you guys listening to our concept plan here. And really, we're looking for more of a professional office. You know, right now we have a dentist going in to the piece that we parceled off. I see this more as like insurance companies, brokerages, that type of user. So yes, I do think it is going to be more of a professional office. There could be some retail component in there, but I think most retail or most retailers like to be right on Linder Road, and this is offset a little bit. And as far as restaurant use to parking for our development, or at least for my development, I want to have as much parking as I can. I know right now I probably don't have enough for a restaurant, I would say, or it'd be tight. I'm trying to do 4 to 5 stalls per 1,000 square feet for office tenants. You know, I know dentists are heavy on the parking spaces. And so that's why I've just tried to provide as much parking as I can. One thing I did want to, how do I go back on this? Oh, okay. I wanted to just show you guys what's just to the south of here. So there is an office development right here with parking up in front of all of these buildings that I mean, it's right on the drive aisle. So that's where I've kind of kept in with that same, there's just this office complex and it comes up through here. So there's no traffic through a residential neighborhood. There is not a lot of traffic on this development. There's also got a curve in the road here that is kind of like a speed, you know, calmer as well. So you know, that is my reasoning for putting parking up there. Plus also I feel like, you know, tenants, they like to have parking on all sides of the building, where these could be individual clients or tenants and have access, you know, doors on either side right here, and it just gives them a little more exposure. And so, you know, I just felt with what had happened to the south, yeah, there's no traffic. I'd be happy to put, you know, speed limit signs on there just to make sure everybody is driving responsible. And that was my reasoning for that. The other reasoning, you know, just if I'm going to take out all this parking, that's 10 stalls, another 10 stalls, another 10 stalls. I'm taking out 30 stalls per staff's recommendations. I just don't feel like you know, with the park, with all the open space, I'd be happy to, you know, provide an access way up to the park. I could provide two, you know, because parking is just so important for the development. There is a 25-foot landscape barrier right here that, you know, we could maybe do some common plaza space within that too. I don't know what your thoughts would be. I know we're just kind of bouncing ideas off, but I kind of like to hear your ideas before I go to city council.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Grove, go ahead.
I can appreciate not wanting to lose 30 spots. That, you know, that is a lot, especially with what you're wanting to do. I would highly recommend, though, at a minimum, looking at those west parking spots. I know, you know, there's examples of other ones here. I think that the uniqueness of this is a little bit different, though. You're not coming off of a 90-degree to get into that space at the same as you would for those parcels to the south that you pointed out. So that it's kind of a blind spot if you're coming south to north. Just trying to help you limit future problems. I think using some of that more as you know, a potential pedestrian connection from what's to the north of you and what's to the south of you. I would much rather see that personally, having a pedestrian, you know, pathway of sorts versus the parking on that side.
I appreciate your comment, Commissioner. We did provide a pedestrian access way that comes all the way along this side. We were required to have one, you know, on one of the sides, and so that was put in. But no, we'll go back and see what we can do there. Parking is such a big deal. But anyways, I do appreciate you guys taking a look at it and give me your comments. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, just another, I don't have a solution for you, but just another comment. I do know that since that access road has connected there to Plaza Shops Drive, I think it's a pretty heavily used alternative now for the high school students coming out of Rocky and going to Winco or doing whatever. So although it may not be, as busy now, I think it's progressively getting more busy, and just another consideration for when you go to city council. Thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a really good point, and I do my eye doctor and my chiropractor are just south of this, so I
Okay.
do use the buildings in here, and I do appreciate what you're saying about how that is, but within, I mean, to me, that's kind of within a complex, and at the same time, what you just said about how close it is to the high school and everything, it's not going to take very long before they all figure out, hey, I can get up to Winco through all of this. I actually thought that was blocked off at the school, but seeing that it's not, that's probably going to be happening in there. So, again, where it's not designed like the buildings down below are, I think you would be better off to go ahead and remove that parking on the west side personally, and keep that drive aisle a little bit more open. As far as more, eliminating parking spots for open space, if we knew what was going in there, that would be a much easier decision. So, I mean, if it's going to be a lot of, kind of restaurant type things, I mean, obviously you want to have all the parking you can, but at the same time, open areas would help facilitate having customers inside and outside of your establishment. So, like I said, I mean, as far as the drive aisle, that's really not something that's not in our purview tonight, but just for the feedback part of it.
Sure. No, I appreciate that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that the first provision in there, you guys are a little bit disagreement about. I think that that's a good one, and we'll probably, more than likely, I can't speak for my fellow commissioners, and I actually can't make a motion, which is wonderful. But I think that one will probably stick. And the second one, we can debate that a little bit more.
Sure. No, I mean, 10 stalls is better than 30. So, yeah, no, I appreciate you giving me your recommendations.
Okay. And I've got to tell you, if Sonia's saying we can eliminate parking, then you've done a great job on parking.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Lorcher, go ahead.
so after all this discussion, remind me, what are we voting on tonight?
We are voting on the preliminary and final plat. We are not, the DA modification goes to city council.
So the preliminary and final plat is to take out the Chili's in the event center and change it to these 4 individual buildings. And the last discussion was just to remove the parking on the common aisle in the west. Is that correct? Or am I missing something?
You'll do a better job at this than I will.
Chairman, Commissioners, the only application that's before you tonight is the subdivision, the proposed combined preliminary and final plat. And that is just a lot line boundary property line thing. It's not a site design. The site design and the site plan is associated with the development agreement modification.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, just follow up with that, Sonia. So the site plan modifications, is that as part of the DA agreement that you're asking for? And so at that point, our motion is, if we want to keep those 20 spaces, would be, we recommend to council. I'm trying to figure out motion wise, what are we trying to say here? Because we can't say to leave those spaces, but we can say we'd recommend maybe to leave them. Is that what we're looking for? Or?
Chairman, Commissioner Yearsley, your motion should be directly related to the preliminary and final plat. If you choose to provide an unofficial recommendation on the development agreement modification, you can do so. But
Okay.
That's not what's before you tonight.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure.
You have anything else to add? Feel free.
So yes, I'll go ahead, Kurt.
I think that's a good description. I really, from the city staff's perspective, we probably should have queued this up a little bit differently in terms of how we agendize it. Really, the discrete item before the commission side is just the preliminary and final plat. And even that is a recommendation to the city council, not an action item or not for final approval tonight. And then really the way the city's ordinance is structured, the recommendation on the concept plan for the DA comes from the community development director, and that is made to the council, and the council makes that decision. So I think Sonia was quite accurate that really you have a discrete action before you, which is a preliminary and final plat. That's a recommendation to the council. If you have, I'll use Sonia's description, if you have some informal comments that you like to work into a motion relative to site plan, I don't think there's any harm in that, but that's not really before you tonight.
Essentially, we would wording such as we would recommend to city council keeping provision 8A, 1 striking, you know, something along those lines. So,
Or we could just close the public hearing and say we recommend leaving the 2 parking spaces, and that, you know, council will, or staff or planning and zoning will actually, I would imagine express our recommendations based on just our discussion, I would assume. So yeah, I don't know if we need to do it in the motion or not.
real quick, is there anybody signed up to give public testimony? I'm guessing not. Nobody else is in chamber. So unless there's anything else to add. Okay, so can I get a motion to close the public hearing for H 2022-0015?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to close the public hearing for item number H 2022-0015. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Any more discussion?
Mr. Chair, I'll just stay, I hadn't expressed my concerns on this. Given that this is marketed to be more of a professional office type facility, I don't see an issue with leaving the 10 parking spaces in between the 2 buildings on each side. I do agree that the west parking probably should be eliminated. However, the one on the lower west, the lower section there, looks like there's quite a bit of room there that you could potentially back out safely, but I'm good either way on that west side.
Anybody else?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Orchard, go ahead.
I was fine with the parking on the west side until you told me it was all high school students running through.
Well,
So, you know,
Possibly.
if people are backing out, and especially at that bottom left corner, and it is kind of a blind corner, and kids are going through for lunch, you know, or whomever, there could be some potential conflicts there. So I would be in support of eliminating the western parking, but that's not really that has nothing really to do with that.
Nope.
Oh, there's my opinion.
Mr. Chair,
go right ahead.
in terms of what we are recommending approval on, I don't see any issues. Ideally, I would love to have seen an event center here just because we need more event space, especially in this, growing area. I know that that's not always the easiest thing to monetize, and can have some unique challenges. I would love to see that, but in lieu of that being, where the applicant is going or wanting to go, I see no issues with the preliminary plat and final plat as presented.
Mr. Grace?
Mr. Chairman, I too don't have any issues with the parking between the buildings. I'm torn on the parking on the west side. I don't feel as strongly negatively about it, but I don't know. Maybe there's something they could do, make it employee parking or something. I don't know, but based on what is before us, yeah, I'm in favor of it.
Okay. You've all spoke, so now somebody gets to make a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Yearsley, go ahead.
after considering all staff, applicant, and public testimony, I move to recommend approval to City Council of file number H 2022-0015 as presented in the staff report for the hearing date of May 19th, 2022, with no modifications. However, we would recommend, or, we do like the idea of leaving the parking in between the 2 buildings.
A second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve item number H 2022-0015 with no modifications. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you very much. I will take one more motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to adjourn.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Thanks, everyone.